I love living across from beautiful horses because I can look at them, but I don't have to take care of them. We are in the middle of a pandemic that stemmed from a communist country, and we are facing all sorts of changes to our government as we know it. Forced lockdowns, businesses forced to close, people growing restless and protesting. If you're ready to talk about those subjects with your kids a little bit, I would highly recommend that you do it using literary analysis with a good book called Animal Farm. Animal Farm is a book that I think that all children should be required to read before they graduate from high school. So I want to tell you a little bit about Animal Farm, and then I'll go into how we use it in homeschool, and also what makes literary analysis a way to spice up your homeschool. Animal Farm was written by George Orwell. George Orwell was a pen name for Eric Blair, who was born in 1903 in India, although I believe he was a British citizen. And George Orwell had taken part in the Spanish Civil War, which was a fight for the independence of Spain against communism. And in that war, he encountered the Russian government. Now, you have to understand a little bit about the history of Russia and the history of the Russian Revolution to understand why he wrote Animal Farm and why it was so important. The Russians were ruled by czars for many years, and the czars ended up treating the Russian people very poorly. They lived off of the backs of the Russian people, who remained peasants and unhealthy and didn't get to enjoy the fruit of their own labor. And so there was a group called the Bolsheviks that rose up and revolted, and the Bolsheviks then were sort of absorbed by Lenin, and he passed away, and then Stalin took over, and that is when things really began to get bad in Russia with the communist type of government. And so George Orwell realized that this government was bad, and fast forward to World War II, when Russia was fighting and helping the Allies to defeat the Germans. The Russians did that because Germany had not kept its word with the Russians, and so the Russians found this to be the best way to attack Germany, is to sort of align themselves with the rest of the Allies. And so after World War II, the sentiment in Great Britain and in the United States for the Russians among the general population was like making a turn. People thought maybe this Joseph Stalin wasn't such a bad guy, and maybe their government wasn't too bad. And George Orwell was very concerned, and rightfully so, about that. And so he wrote a book that is a brilliant piece of literature because it's very easy for anybody to understand. And that piece of literature is Animal Farm. Now, Animal Farm is a story about a farmer named Mr. Jones, who represents the czars of Russia, who is a terrible farmer. He's a drunk, he's a glutton, he does not take care of his animals, he has no regard for them whatsoever. And the animals one night in the barn have a meeting, and the meeting is spearheaded by a boar named Old Major. Mosquito already this time of year here in Oregon. Old Major is a combination of Karl Marx and Lenin, and he gives this rousing, moving speech about how there needs to be a revolution, and he doesn't know when it's going to happen, but there needs to be one soon. And then he suddenly dies the next day, and the animals plan a revolution. The pigs are at the top of the hierarchy. They have dogs that carry out their orders. The working class is represented by a horse named Baxter. The bourgeoisie is represented by a horse, I think her name is Molly. There's a crow that represents religion on the whole, and there's other characters in the book too that are really interesting, but the characters are pretty one-dimensional, which makes it really easy to understand what's going on and very easy to teach your kids about. So the animals come up with a creed that they're going to hold by, and as time goes on, the creed keeps changing, and by the end of the book, the pigs that are running things, they're run by Snowball, who represents Leon Trotsky, and Napoleon, who represents Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin is the one who remains at the end because he has Trotsky executed. By the end of the book, the animals are far worse living under the pigs. And it's a very interesting book, talking about communism on the whole. So it's a good book to help your kids understand government. So we begin our literary analysis with this book. First of all, the first thing you have to do is get a copy of the book Animal Farm, which you can actually do online through a free PDF. You just Google George Orwell, Animal Farm free, and you can get a PDF file of the book to read for free. This study guide is produced by a company called Learning Links. They're called Novel Ties. They have these for a lot of different books, clear from preschool, picture books, all down through, you know, 5th grade through 12th grade. This is a 7th to 8th grade level reading book, and I am using this as part of the credit for my freshmen for their English credit for the year, because they are already taking a full curriculum. Because I'm their mother, their teacher, and their curriculum director, I get to add what I want to their grammar and English requirements, and so every year we usually choose at least one, maybe two of these books to go through this with. So the guides are pretty straightforward. They give you a synopsis of the book. They give background information about the history of the book and about the author. There's a lot of pre-reading activities, and then they go through each chapter with some type of workbook activities there. You don't have to buy a study guide. You can look up study guides sometimes on different websites. You could Google study guide and see what you could come up with for free. There's a website called Soft Schools that does this, and you can probably find ideas for Animal Farm on Pinterest. Here's your synopsis, your background information, and your author information. So what I do is I have them do some of the pre-reading activities that I deem important, and we do them very well to kind of set the stage. For example, for this book, and there might be things you have them do that are not in here. For this book, I went back and reviewed Russian history myself, and then I discussed it with my children using a timeline that I found online. Not surprisingly, my kids remembered more about all of this than I did, because they have a young brain and I do not. So it's more important to pick a couple of these and do them well than it is to just worry about checking off the boxes and doing all of them. And then you get into the worksheets for each section. They've got a fairly rigorous vocabulary section, some study questions. This one happened to have a Venn diagram, which is good for your more visual people, and some pretty good writing activities that I had my children do as well. So what I do is I have them finish those chapters, and then we meet together for a discussion, and that is when the fun really starts. So it's hard to have a really good discussion about something that you don't know very much about, and so that's the reason that I have them read the chapter and do the questions, not just read the chapter, but do the questions, so they have to process through writing, and it helps trigger their memory, and then we can come together and have a pretty good discussion about the topics in the book. And what I love about doing literary analysis with a good book is that you are able to really get an idea about what your kids think. It's hard sometimes for teens to communicate their feelings and their thoughts, and when you're reading a book, it provides an arena to explore those thoughts and feelings in, and you can discuss it, and it's a pretty inert arena. You don't have to worry about hurting their feelings. They don't really hurt yours, because you know the teen years can be a little bit dicey with emotions running high, and your own emotions running high sometimes. And so a book discussion provides a lot of rigorous discussion that doesn't have a lot of drama with it. And you get to talk about a lot of good things that you're told not to talk about. You're told not to talk about religion and politics and feelings and ideas a lot, and reading a good book and discussing it can really help understand where your kids' thoughts are coming from and help you as the parent shape them with the worldview that you are trying to impart to your children, or the values you're trying to impart. The characters in Animal Farm are pretty one-dimensional, so you can sort of see, you know, this character is a bully, and this character is loyal but not really bright, and this character just cares about ease and comfort. And you can tie a lot of studying the characters into how you conduct your own behavior on a day-to-day basis. If you are a Christian person, you can tie the book of Proverbs in and different examples from the scriptures in the character developments of good books as well. The best part, though, about it is that when you have these good discussions with your children and you talk about these different characters, is that it builds a connection with you and your kids. And that's what educating your children is really about. It's not about memorizing facts. It's about trying to forge and build a connection with your children. And, you know, whether you are in public school with your children, private school, homeschool, to have a well-educated child, you have to have an involved parent. And so I would really encourage you, if you are doing the computer schooling right now because of the pandemic and you're running out of things to do, pick a good book that you had as a child, and or pick Animal Farm, or pick something that you think that your children would like, and do a literature study with them and see what comes out of it. So I hope that this helps you in some way, and if you've ever done a literature study, leave it in the links below, or leave it in the comments below, and I'll consider doing it with my own kids. Thanks, and have a good night.